Welcome back to this Explainer. I'm so glad you're here because today we're looking at one of the most defining eras in American history, the Great Depression. But hey, we're not just going to sit here and stare at dry economic charts. No way. We're going to focus on an incredible story of human resilience and survival. So let's jump right in and see how everyday folks actually lived through such a monumental crisis.
Now, when we talk about the Great Depression, big macroeconomic stats usually steal the spotlight. I mean, look at this staggering number. 25%. That was the unemployment rate. Roughly 1 in 4 workers couldn't find a job. And right alongside that massive figure, thousands of bank failures were wiping out people's life savings literally overnight. Honestly, it's pretty easy to just get totally lost in those intimidating numbers.
But here's the thing. Behind every single one of those percentage points were millions of real families. People just like you and me, suddenly navigating this extraordinary, completely unprecedented hardship. To really wrap our heads around this period, historians tell us we've got to pivot our focus away from those giant macro-level stats and zoom way in on the micro-level. We need to look at how ordinary Americans adapted, how they struggled, and ultimately how they supported one another to make it through to the other side.
So let's start with part 1, daily life and resourcefulness. Facing sudden, crushing poverty meant a total transformation of how a household functioned day to day. Families had to drastically slash their spending, and they took some incredibly active, resourceful steps to pull it off. If they had even a tiny patch of dirt, you better believe they were growing their own food in small vegetable gardens just to keep dinner on the table. Instead of buying new clothes, they were mending worn-out stuff by lamplight. People found remarkably creative ways to stretch whatever limited resources they had. And actually, one of the biggest adaptations was with housing. Extended families started doubling up. It became super common for multiple generations to just live under one roof, sharing a small home simply to cut costs and pool together what little income they had left.
And what's truly fascinating here is the long-term impact of all these adaptations. Historians point out that this intense period of forced frugality didn't just magically end when the economy finally recovered. Nope, it gave rise to this deep, strong culture of resourcefulness. This wasn't just a temporary fix. It fundamentally shaped an entire generation's attitude toward money, toward waste, and towards saving for decades to come. These families literally carried those tough lessons of resilience with them for the rest of their lives.
That brings us to part 2, the Dust Bowl migration. While families were doing everything they could inside their homes, a massive environmental crisis was brewing outside. The Dust Bowl was this severe, punishing drought combined with a terrible agricultural crisis. Throughout the 1930s, this disaster literally destroyed farmland across a massive swath of the country, hitting states like Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas incredibly hard. You know, the Great Depression was already this massive economic collapse, but for farming families out in the Great Plains, this environmental disaster just completely compounded their misery, turning the very earth they relied on into blowing dust.
So, the really crucial takeaway here is that this 1-2 punch of economic ruin and environmental devastation left folks with absolutely no choice. Hundreds of thousands of farming families were forced to just leave their homes entirely. We've all seen those stark historical photographs from this era, right? Families packing every single thing they owned into these battered cars and trucks, leaving behind the dry, cracked farmland. They headed westward, migrating towards states like California, in a desperate search for agricultural work and, well, ultimately, a search for hope.
Moving right along to part 3, community and coping mechanisms.
Let's look at how people actually managed the immense emotional and physical toll of this era. Because despite the overwhelming hardship, historical records show us that this period fostered some incredibly strong community bonds. Neighbors were sharing food, tools, and support. People weren't just hoarding what little they had. They were really stepping up for each other. They banded together, forming this tight-knit support system where sharing a cup of flour or a vital farming tool could literally mean the difference between starvation and survival for the family next door.
But, people also desperately needed a mental break from it all. Entertainment and affordable escapes became absolutely crucial coping mechanisms. Families would gather around the radio to listen to programs together. Affordable movies provided a couple of hours of pure escapism in a dark theater. And, fun fact, this exact period of hardship is when board games like Monopoly became massively popular. People also gravitated heavily towards stories with hopeful or aspirational themes. They just needed to believe that things could get better, and these affordable activities provided a much-needed temporary escape from their daily struggles.
Now, let's zoom back out for part 4, a shift toward Roosevelt.
All of these years of grassroots hardship and migration eventually boiled over into a massive demand for political change on the national stage. By 1932, public frustration had grown significantly. The previous administration had taken a more limited federal response to the crisis, and citizens felt this response just wasn't enough to curb the economic downturn. This widespread sentiment contributed directly to the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who campaigned on a promise of direct, sweeping government action.
And this political shift set the stage for something monumental: the New Deal. This was a series of new government programs and policies designed to completely reshape the federal government's role in the American economy going forward. It was a direct response born out of the citizens' struggles, a major pivot from limited intervention to active, hands-on government involvement in the economic recovery.
Looking back at the incredible journey we've just covered, we started in the early 1930s with the daily hardship and the incredible resourcefulness of families simply trying to eat and keep a roof over their heads. We then tracked the mass movement of the Dust Bowl migration throughout the decade as environmental disaster compounded the economic ruin. From there, we saw how those intense years of struggle led directly to the pivotal 1932 election of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and finally, how that election kicked off the beginning of the New Deal in 1933. It really is a powerful macro to micro arc, showing how individual family struggles literally shifted the course of a nation's government.
The resilience of the American people during this time was nothing short of remarkable. They leaned on each other, they adapted, and they demanded change. But, well, that leaves us with a massive question. How exactly would this New Deal reshape America? What did those policies actually look like on the ground? And did they even work? That is exactly what we're going to dive into in part 3 of this series, where we'll explore Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal in full detail. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible story of survival. I'll catch you in the next Explainer.